I'm going to start off the sermon today with a little story. You call it a parable, maybe. There was a middle-aged gentleman, lived out in the mountains. He loved to walk in the mountains and see the beauty of God. So he was out walking one morning, sun shining, but it was cold. And as he walked, a fog came in. I don't know if y'all ever been in the mountains, but a fog can just instantly be on top of you. Well, he continued walking, and as he walked, he got off the path because he couldn't see the ground. The next thing he knew is he walked off a cliff. As he fell, he grabbed a branch of a tree and hung on to it. There he was hanging. He didn't know how far the ground was below him. He was cold, and he kept praying. And he heard his voice, "Turn loose." He said, "I can't turn loose, I'll fall." Turn loose. Well, he just couldn't do it. He couldn't turn loose. He didn't have the faith to listen to that voice. Well, the next morning, people went out looking for him, and they found him. He was still hanging in a tree, frozen to death. 6 feet under him was the ground. If he had had the faith to turn loose, he'd been fine. And that's the way it is with us. We've got to have the faith to follow God, to follow what He tells us to do. And He tells us, if you'll listen, He does tell you. He tells you where to go, what to do, and how to do it, if you listen. We go to our Bible today, on the story in the Bible. The woman had the faith. She tried everything in the world. Nothing happened. Nothing worked. But she had the faith that God could cure her. And she went up to Jesus, fell and touched his robe. And she was cured. Of course, she melted back into the crowd. But Jesus was standing there, and he felt it. He felt the loss of power. So what did he do? He turned around to see who touched him. Well, of course, nobody was stepping forward at that time. But as he said his words, the lady stepped forward, fell on her knees, and said, "It was I." She had fear in saying it. She didn't know what he was going to do. But she had faith. Well, whatever it was, it would be right. And he forgave her, told her she was well to stand up and go on with her life. The man from the temple standing there talking to him about his daughter. 12-year-old girl was sick. She was dying. He'd gone to every doctor. They'd done everything they could to help the child. But there was nothing to be done. And as they're talking, a man from the temple came and said, "Your daughter's dead." So Jesus gathers this group and he goes to the house. Gets all the people out of the house. Because a lot of the things that he did in private. It wasn't for all the world to see. It was a message to the people he was with. And he raised the child. People were amazed, of course, as we would be. But the reason she was raised or brought back to life, however you want to look at it, was because the father had the faith. He knew God could do it. He knew that Jesus, through God's help, with God's power, could do what the girl needed. Faith is a funny thing, in a way. If you think about it, we all say we have faith. But when it gets down to that point when we have to make a decision, do we always follow that faith? Do we do what we should do the right way? Do we buck the world at the time, people that we're around, etc.? Or do we do what is right? Follow that faith. Follow what Jesus or God is telling us to do, telling us how to act, how to treat people, how to live. But we have to follow that. And that's the hardest thing, is to follow that. We're a funny people. We like to be in control. Everybody likes to be in their own control of their own self and their own world, their own ideas and all that. We want to be in control. And the hardest thing we have to do is to give up that control, to let God take control, to let Him give us information and directions and what we need to do. And that is very hard to do. I think men are even worse than women because we're stubborn, but we have to give up control. God has got to be in control to make you do what you need to do. And sometimes it's not easy. But in the world as it's put together, it just doesn't work unless you do it. There's no such thing as coincidence. We are placed where we are by God to do something. We have to have the faith to follow that. We do something, we may never know what it was that we did. We may have affected somebody's life, totally changed their life, just because of what we did, and we'll never know it. Sometimes we do understand, and we know what we did. But it was because God told us to do it, and we followed Him. We had the faith to follow. And that's the difficult part of life, is giving up that control. And you think about your own life. Think of all the things that you do. How much of it is control? You're controlling things in the home. You're controlling things out at your job. You're controlling things all the time. You're doing things to keep control of it because you think it'll go out of hand if you don't do this. We're not that important. God is in control. We are just a person to use to make it happen. God will control it some way. The world's not going to go crazy just because we don't do something. But we can go crazy. We can do what's not right. And that's the point. When God tells you to do something, you need to do it. And we're sitting there in the easy chair, I really don't want to get up and go do that. I need to do it, but I just don't want to do it. Well, there's a reason for it. God has some reason for you to be at that point, wherever it is. You can think of the world as a map. You're one piece of that map. Take that one piece out, doesn't look very important, doesn't have much on it. And you look at the map and there's a hole there. Now everybody that doesn't follow the rule takes a piece of that map out. All of a sudden, half the map's gone. Well, you can't do it with half a map. People have got to say, wait a minute, God's telling me to do this, I've got to do it. Put the piece back in the map. Then we have a complete map, and everything works out right. I had a gentleman come to me one day. He said, I want to thank you. To be honest with you, I didn't even remember him. I didn't know who he was. And he told me who he was. But I had done something for him, some little thing. He remembered that. And this was several years earlier when I'd done this. And he had remembered that. That one thing changed his life. That one thing made him understand what God is all about. Not me. God did it. I am nothing but a funnel. God feeds into me and out to y'all, or out to whoever I'm talking to. That's what we are. It's not us doing things, it's God doing them through us. We have to have the faith. We have to have the ability to follow that faith and trust in God, trust that He is going to do what is right. We know He will. He always does. But that we will do what's right in the way He wants it done. That's the only thing you have to worry about. If you do that, everything works out. It always does. We think sometimes it doesn't, but it does. Because we can't see the big picture. We can't see this map. We can't see what's going on. All we've got is this little world right here. And this little world down here sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down. You know, you never know if it's going to be right or wrong. But this little part of the world affects the whole world. You can think about the countries of the world. How many countries in the world that are affecting the whole world? Iran, North Korea, China, you know, they're affecting the whole world. But they're a little country, millions and millions of people over here in the world and a few here. But they affect other people. Well, we affect other people the same way. Smaller scale, same thing. But it all goes back to that one word, faith. You've got to trust God. You've got to know that whatever He tells you to do is what's necessary. It's what we need to do. And sometimes it gets difficult. And sometimes we think, how is this going to affect anybody? But you've got to keep remembering you're not seeing the whole world. You're not seeing the whole picture. You're just seeing your little part of it, which is important, but it's still a little part of it. So we got to broaden our horizons. And God will give you that information as you need it. As you broaden your horizons and start to understand more, He'll give you more information. He'll open your eyes. He'll feed your heart. And you'll begin to understand more and more and more of what the world is all about. I have a thinking. I believe we were put on this world for one reason, to learn. To learn what's right, to learn what we need to know. And if we open our minds and hearts to that, we will learn. It's kind of like the old boy, this kid came home and told his dad, he said, "Hey, Dad, I understand finally what's all about the Bible." He said, "Oh, really? Well, what is it?" "Well, it stands for something. Basic instruction before leaving Earth." Think about that. He's right. That's what the Bible is. It's an instruction book telling us on how to live. If we could follow this Bible word for word and do what it tells us to do, we got it made. We've got to accept Jesus Christ as our Savior and follow that book. And have the faith to do what God tells us to do. And that's one of the biggest parts also, is the faith. And it's the hardest part of the whole thing. It's not that hard to accept Jesus. We can do that. But to have the faith to follow Him takes a lot of power, a lot of control, because we want to do it our way. And our way may not be the right way. So the next time you get one of those little feelings that says you go do something, go do it. You'll be surprised. Things work out. They always do. Every time you go do something, it works out. And you don't understand, never may know who you have affected, whose life you have changed, whose life you have made better, just because you took that step and gave control to God. So when you get out of here and go home and think about it a little bit, you get one of those feelings, turn it loose. Give it to Him. Let God handle things. And you'll be surprised how it works out. Amen.